Meanwhile, the Constitutional Court yesterday dismissed an application from Jacob Zuma and the MK party to recuse a number of justices in the matter between the party and the IEC. Zuma and MK wanted the judges off the case, citing that they sat on the bench that sentenced Zuma to a 15-month prison sentence in 2021. They also wanted Chief Justice Raymond Zondo recused. Zondo was, however, not on the bench yesterday. Joining me now is Zaakirah Vadi, Defend Our Democracy Executive Director. Appreciate your time. Thanks for speaking to us this afternoon. Now, how does the Constitutional Court's dismissal of Zuma's recusal request reinforce the principles of judicial independence and impartiality in South Africa?
So the judges that were present yesterday gave their reasons for why they thought they shouldn't be recused. From Defend Our Democracy side and a range of other organizations that endorsed the recent statement, we think that the Constitutional Court would be able to bear an impartial judgment on this particular matter, and we would respect the outcome of the judiciary, both in terms of the particular judges not recusing themselves, as well as the final outcome of the matter as well.
So what would be the potential long-term impacts of this ruling on the public's perception of the judiciary and its role in upholding democracy?
I think the judiciary in South Africa, at least post-democracy, has stood the test of time. They've made significant rulings, for example, around issues related to state capture, corruption, and a whole range of other issues that impact the country on a longer term. That being said, this Constitutional Court ruling does have an impact on broader issues of democracy, particularly how members access the National Assembly or how people are selected to be National Assembly members. And that particular process is extremely important because ultimately it's the guidelines that determine who goes to Parliament, how they go to Parliament, what's the selection criteria for it. And ultimately the people that go to Parliament are those who make the laws of the country. So it does impact the broader issue of democracy. In terms of the Constitutional Court, I think that there will always be perceptions about it. But we are a rules-based country that follows the directive of the court ultimately, and everyone is subject to that rule of law. And I think that remains intact.
Now, historically, there's been some measure of political influence in legal matters. How can organizations such as your organization ensure that the judiciary remains free from political influence?
Well, one, I think, is to respect the rule of law when the rule of law follows the broad constitutional principles, firstly. Secondly, there are a number of organizations such as Judges Matter, Freedom Under Law, the Alan Suzman Foundation, for example, that look at policy-related matters in relation to South Africa's legal system. So how are judges selected? What's the criteria for that? That work is ongoing work. It's something that needs to regularly be looked at so that we strengthen our systems. But beyond that, I think it's important for every politician in this country, whether they are a current politician or former politician, to recognize the fact that they themselves remain under the rule of law. They are subject to the rule of law, as is every other person in this country. And with that respect comes the ultimate strengthening of the judiciary as well.
I hope I'm saying this right, but how does the involvement of amicus curiae like the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, Corruption Watch and CASAC contribute to the integrity of the legal process in cases with significant political implications?
Well, organizations have done this, through a number of cases. It's not something new. I think they bring particular points of importance before the court that they would like to strengthen or emphasize. In this particular matter, one of the fundamental elements that have been brought before the court is that this is a matter of constitutionality. So it's about interpretation of Section 47 of the Constitution, and that really does have long-term bearing, as I've stated, on the way in which National Assembly members are chosen in future. So it's something that requires constitutional clarity, and organizations that are centered around work doing constitutionalism, I think, have a role to play in this regard.
I must ask around the issue around impartiality. We'd all like to believe that the judiciary are some of the most impartial individuals, but they're also human beings. And when you take the cases of the former President Jacob Zuma into account, there's several cases where he's done a back and forth with the judiciary. How important is it for those individuals who might feel a continual questioning of either their own standing or the various arguments that they put across when individuals like Jacob Zuma continue to attack, if you will, for want of a better description, the judiciary?
So I'm not a legal expert, and I can only reflect on what came out of yesterday's hearing. I think that the argument that was made that judges frequently have to hear several matters perhaps relating to the same individual or the same set of litigants over a course of time. And this is not unusual in any judicial system, particularly South Africa's judicial system. And judges themselves have to uphold their oath of office in terms of being impartial where they judge on different matters. The distinction that was made yesterday is that the judges are not ruling on a previous matter related to the former president, but they're really ruling on a new matter, which is interpretation of Section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution. And they therefore have to come with a fresh mind into this particular matter. So I think it's something that perhaps judicial experts would be able to explain in greater detail. When people appear before the judiciary, the kind of sense of, yesterday there was an argument perhaps made from the side of the former president that he feels a sense of discomfort appearing before these judges. And I don't think anyone's particular discomfort can be the guidelines for which a particular judge may want to recuse themselves, because then anyone who appears before the judiciary can make that particular argument, and it sets a precedent that perhaps the judiciary of this country may not be able to keep up with.
It's a fair point, Zaakirah. You recently, your organisation, Defend Our Democracy, and a number of other organisations recently signed a petition in which you reiterated an appeal for the respect and upholding of the rule of law by stakeholders. Just give us some insights into the importance of this petition at this time, only days before the May 29 election.
Well, about 35 civil society organizations signed this particular statement, and that ranges from organizations that have more of a national footprint, as well as community-based organizations. And the idea behind it is that whatever the outcome of the Constitutional Court, whether it's in favor of MK, whether it's in favor of the IEC, that needs to be respected by all stakeholders, and that the organizations themselves will respect that outcome. Before an election takes place, we do need a climate of stability, a climate of peace and calm. And I think that respect for the outcome of this judicial hearing and respect for the rule of law, once that decision is made, is something that then sets the scene for a climate of stability. Elections, I think, are successful in such a climate, and we want to avoid a scenario where that's not the case in the country.
Zaakirah, what is the relationship of your organisation, or at least a number of these organisations that signed this petition, with the various political parties? And the reason I ask is because they potentially have a lot more power than you do to advise their own members on the conduct that they should have.
So different, civil society organizations may have different political persuasions, and that doesn't mean that they have party political persuasions. But from the side of Defend Our Democracy, we are party politically non-partisan. At the same time, we do believe that it's important to get actively involved in the politics of this country. So taking a political stance on issues where it relates to principle, and the guiding document that frames that principle is the Constitution. So that's the stance of organizations more generally. But I think that civil society organizations have consistently played a very positive role in numerous instances in the country. And perhaps we don't have, direct insights into what takes place in political parties, but I think that it does manage to canvass a view from a range of other people who perhaps may not find a home in political parties and be able to champion that view in the interests of the country. So if we take, pre-1994, you would have had civil society activists, for example, standing up against apartheid, the SACC and churches playing a very active role then. Post-apartheid, you would have seen organizations like Treatment Action Campaign championing very progressive policies in relation to HIV and AIDS, for example. And similarly, I think that trend has continued, and it's something that's quite positive for democracy more generally.
Now, it is agreed in many quarters, Zaakirah, that this is the most contested election that we've ever had, and also the one election where many political parties and many individuals have a lot to lose. Is it enough to sign a petition, or do you feel that more needs to be done to ensure that we don't have unrest of any sort, regardless of any outcomes during this elective period?
So a statement and perhaps media interviews, I think, are the bare minimum. What I would like to add is that a number of organizations have now taken on the responsibility of becoming election observers. And this is a voluntary process. It's completely politically nonpartisan. It means having people stationed at voting stations and ensuring that the election is free and fair and there's integrity to that particular process. And for the first time this year, we've had, at least from Defend Our Democracy side, over 1,000 people sign up for that process. And hopefully for the 2026 and 2029 elections, we can improve that number. But through the system, it's really about having a grassroots presence at voting stations on election day and actively being part of ensuring a free and fair elections. So that's something that will happen during this election, and it's hopefully something that we can strengthen over time.